Max, what are you going to do to make Ethereum great again? Let's just start with that. That's what everybody wants to know. Then we can just be done with it and go to F1.
Yeah. I think we need to hire like a bunch of F1 engineers to make the chain go really, really fast. But more seriously, we need to focus on the L1 because we've neglected it for too long and nobody wants to build on it anymore. And so the best thing to do would be to focus all of our attention and energy immediately on scaling the L1, making it faster, making it more competitive with some of the newer blockchains, because we still have all of these network effects on ETH. We have all of the liquidity on ETH. We have a bunch of mind share. We have a better culture. We have better dev tooling. We have all these things that are better on ETH, but we just can't get out of our own way by doing the simple things like reducing the block time, increasing the gas limit, and we're focused on kind of doing irrelevant things that don't matter to users. And as a result, because we're not doing things that matter to users, they're leaving and going to other ecosystems. And so the best thing to do would be basically immediately stop all of the navel gazing, all of the L2 roadmap, all of the things that are going on right now, and immediately focus on scaling the L1.
But isn't L2s the solution that you're talking about? Shorter block times, ultra fast. It's really easy for users to use. Like, what's your take on L2s?
It sounds like you just described Solana to me as well.
Is that where you're going to breakpoint later this week?
I will be at breakpoint later this week as a token ETH representative. Like when Ben Franklin went to France during the revolution.
I think you should just make Karate Combat, but with Max versus all the other chain representatives.
I think I would have a pretty good shot, to be honest. I think there's some people who've been neglecting their workouts, Vitalik lately, I don't know.
He's got good cardio. Don't underestimate him.
He has good cardio.
And he's pretty lanky. There's some range there.
I think if I catch him, then it might be over for him. But he's tall. He's got the reach. So.
But that's within Ethereum ecosystem. I'm putting you out to challenge other ecosystems. Like, you got to take on Anatoly.
I think Toli could be. Well, I will be taking on Toli later this week in a battle of wits. But I think Toli could be a challenge for sure.
What about Ilya from Nier? He's a Russian. No.
Yeah. I think I could. I would give myself. I would buy myself at 65 on that one.
Okay, so back to parasitic L2s. Hot take?
Yeah, I would just say that L2s are basically competing directly with the L1 for users, and they're winning, and we're basically bending over backwards to do their bidding and make their life as easy as possible to take our users away. So my suggestion would be stop doing that. In some ways, there's a response to this that says, well, we've been doing this for 3 years. This was the plan all along. Well, if the plan didn't turn out as we'd hoped, maybe we should probably change the plan instead of continue to double down on it.
I just have to say from a user endpoint, though, that Base and Coinbase wallet with account abstraction is so much easier for myself to use than MetaMask.
Ooh. Yeah, well, we're working on it. Unfortunately, MetaMask on ETH has the disadvantage of being reliant on 12-second block times. So we also have our own account abstraction tech on Base as well. But I think the goal for me is to make using MetaMask on the L1 as seamless as possible, and that means reducing the block time for sure.
So what do you think could reduce the block time besides what you've already mentioned? I know you've talked about multi-proposers. At Flashbots, we're working on, at least more private block building within a TE environment. But we can potentially save a little bit of time there as well.
Well, the solution to making the block time shorter is not to put it on a really slow TE to build the block. I think these things are not that's very clearly in the opposite direction, in my opinion. But
I'm just trying to show. God damn it.
Okay, sorry. Okay, I'll take it back. The thing I would say that we need to do immediately, which is very low hanging fruit, is to move the calculation of the state root from the current block into the previous block, and this would take the calculation of the state root off the critical path. And it would basically clear out a huge bottleneck to shorter block times. And then there's another bottleneck to shorter block times, which is the fact that we don't have delegated proof of stake. We have like this weird system in ETH where you can only stake up to 32 ETH. But in the next hard fork, we're scheduled to have the max EB change, which will open it up to much more than 32 ETH. And the result of that should be much fewer validators and a lower number of signatures to aggregate, and that's a lot of the overhead as well. Also, we could increase the hardware and bandwidth requirements for nodes.
So you are basically saying become more like Solana?
When other ecosystems have good ideas and are winning, the correct response is not to sneer at them and say, oh, like, that's a Solana thing. Like they don't get a monopoly on a good idea just because they had it first. Also, I don't think we need to make nodes huge data centers. I think we just need to make them have reasonable hardware requirements for a, first world country that has, maybe you can spend $1,000 on your node and get enough hardware and bandwidth to run the chain. Whereas right now the hardware requirements haven't been changed in 8 years and are much below that.
So how would this affect the sponsor of this panel, Lido, in your new world of validators?
I think it means that it's probably good for Lido because it means that people will stake. There will be fewer home stakers and more Lido stakers.
This is not financial advice, by the way, or any advice to that regard.
Not financial advice. I used to have a podcast called Not Financial Advice. We got through 2 episodes, and then we had to cancel it. Well, it was with Anthony Lee Zhang, who's a professor at Chicago Booth, and he was like, oh, I need to go work on my tenure. So.
Is it still on like Spotify? Where can we find these?
I think it's on YouTube. It's like very early days Max Resnick if you're interested in the origin story. Yeah.
Okay, so everybody go to YouTube, check out Max's origin story and his maybe soon to be resurrected podcast of not giving financial advice or ETH advice. Okay, so you are not a lover of L2s. You're not a OP chain maxi, you're not an Arbitrum maxi, you're not any sort of L2 maxi, you're a Solana maxi.
I'm not a Solana maxi. I'm a decentralized compute that's usable maximalist. And wherever that is, then I'll be supportive of it. I think Solana has a lot of issues as well, and they're working on solving them. The difference between Solana and ETH is that ETH is unwilling to accept that it has issues and is unwilling to work towards solving them. And Solana has, in some ways, many more issues, but they're incrementally making progress on solving them, and they care a lot about it, and they care about the user experience. So my argument is basically ETH should do the same thing, which is to be extremely critical, to be extremely honest and precise about what the problems are with ETH today. And then instead of trying to make these kind of incremental small steps, make a big change that makes the network better from first principles rather than from what can we do that's only a slight modification of the current protocol. Because if the current protocol is broken, you're never going to get to a good protocol by making incremental steps. I mean, one of the examples of this is like the max EB change that I was just talking about. The thing we should have done probably from the start was just do delegated proof of stake. Instead, we ended up with this weird halfway point system where we have places like Lido, who's sponsoring this, and A41, and all these staking providers, which is fine. They would be staking providers in a delegated proof of stake system too, but it just increased the friction a lot and made it so that smaller staking providers had a harder time getting mindshare and competing. And it also made like a bunch of issues on the actual tech because we have way more signatures than we need, because we have one box that's running like 5,000 validators on one box, and it's just signing with a different message, or signing with a different private key, like many attestations from the same box, and it's just like way more overhead than we need. So we really should have done was rethink it and say, okay, we're going to move to delegated proof of stake because we have it anyway. But instead we didn't, and we just tried to make an incremental step, like raising the effective balance. And I think that's like probably not the best approach to fixing the chain. Like we should just think from first principles and then fix the chain, not do an incremental step.
So it sounds like it's just pushing the centralization problem of like having centralized builders to maybe more centralized validators now. Is that kind of what you're thinking along the terms of like Solana, where you just have these giant centralized validators running their, super expensive nodes?
No, I think like the thing about Solana is that the validator marketplace is much more competitive than it is on ETH, because on ETH, you have, like on Solana, they have delegated proof of stake, and so stake is constantly moving around, and you can see it, and even the biggest staker on Solana, Galaxy, has only about 4% of the network, whereas Coinbase on ETH has like almost 15% of the network, right? Because basically, and in contrast, Coinbase on Solana has like 3.5% of the network. So this is not centralizing. This is like opening up to delegated proof of stake is not centralizing. It's actually the opposite, because it makes the marketplace more fluid and competitive.
But doesn't that bring about, I think, the more you move it towards Solana, I think everybody realizes that there's a pretty huge MEV problem within Solana space. At least within Ethereum, it's somewhat been addressed. Not 100%. There, it still exists. But you're allowing a lot more front running, a lot more negative impact if it moves toward, I think, the throughput that Solana currently has.
I don't think the problem on ETH has been addressed at all. I think it's been contained, maybe, is one way to say it. But basically, all of the MEV that was possible before still exists. It might not result in spam, which is good, but it still exists, and it still is extraction that is taking away value from users and making frictions on the chain higher. And that is like just a consequence of the architecture of the L1. It's not a fault of Flashbots or anybody else who built these architectures. Like PBS is the natural equilibrium point, and probably Solana is moving in that direction as well. But the problem of MEV is not solved. It's 600 million a year or more going from users to validators. And so this is like, it might sound good if you're a validator, but actually it's bad for you because you're shrinking the pie. You want the big pie, you want a small slice of the big pie. You don't want a big slice of a small pie.
I would say it's addressed on mainnet, just in the sense that while it's not 100% effective, at least there's things like Flashbots Protect. I mean, vShare, even MetaMask has an integration where users are giving the right to be background and then receiving a refund from it. So at least there's a transference of some of the MEV back to the user. Whereas in, I believe, the Solana ecosystem, and even in the L2s, if the MEV exists in that stage, there's no transference of it back to the end user, which is where I'm saying the MEV problem still exists within the L2 space, or any sort of single kind of sequencer sort of system.
Yeah, but sandwiching isn't the main culprit in MEV. Like, it's arbitrage, which is the main culprit. And I think we tend to over-index on sandwiching because it's popular to do this, because it's like obviously bad. But arbitrage is also bad.
Is that sextex arbitrage or atomic arbitrage?
They're the same thing. One of them is like, atomic arbitrage is you take a trade and then you hedge it out on chain. And sextex arbitrage is you take the same trade and you hedge it out off chain, and usually you get a better price for the hedge off chain, but you have to have a little bit more expertise. But in the end, like the valuable leg of the arb is, the pool on, like one of the pools on the chain has the wrong price. And so you just take it to fair. And then whether you hedge that out immediately or hedge it out like 2 seconds later on Binance is the same trade.
I think it's a little bit different, and this is coming from my TradFi background, that the sextex is a little bit more stat arby, and you do have intrinsic risk in that, versus atomic arb, there is no intrinsic risk. You either get it or not. That's my take. But I do agree that on L2s, the sandwiching is probably a little bit more difficult. It's not as big a concern as it is on L1s, but it's very difficult to say.
I think we're seeing like the shift from, because of the same opportunities that generate atomic arbitrage generate like non-atomic arbitrage opportunities as well. And it's just a matter of like whether the agents observing the chain are sophisticated enough to harvest it in the more efficient way, which is through like a non-atomic arbitrage, and whether they have the risk management systems and the fair value systems in place to do that. So I would say they're the same thing. The value source is that mispricing. Anyway, back to my original point, that is the majority of the value from MEV, and it's not solved. And if it's not as if like we can just say, oh well, we lost $600 million a year to arbitrage because the chain sucks. It's like, no, we should have urgency. We have to fix that. That is not okay.
So in your state where you're saying L2s are parasitic and now all the swap volume goes to L2s because it's cheaper and there's MEV there, and then obviously there's priority fees. This is your thought pattern where we should be buying OP, buying Arbitrum, buying these, L2 tokens that are collecting the priority fees that should be going back to Ethereum, is what you're saying. Is that what you're sad about?
I think it's not financial advice, but the reality is that the fundamentals of these tokens, like the fundamental value of OP and ETH, are anti-correlated, because if OP gets a bunch of users, that actually means that it probably took a bunch of users away from ETH mainnet, and they're paying less in fees because the network effect of mainnet is now broken up across several fragmented L2s. So, but I mean, they've done a bunch of other stuff. This is also not financial advice, but they've done a bunch of other stuff to these tokens that has made them unbuyable, like just giving away a bunch of money for random stuff. So if they stopped doing that and then they started attributing the sequencer revenue directly to the token, then it would probably be the case that there would be a natural spread trade to buy the OP token, for example, and sell ETH and capture that spread. But ETH is a much better asset for other reasons than this, because it doesn't have like all this allocation to venture capitalists in the same way that these L2 tokens do, and it doesn't continue to have a runaway DAO giving away massive amounts of money for useless things.
So now you hate DAOs as well as L2s.
Yes.
You heard it here first. Your next podcast would be not DAO advice.
I don't think anybody like really thinks that DAOs are like anymore. Maybe when I first got into the space, they were very excited about DAOs, but I think everybody realizes that a DAO is a like kind of broken governance structure, and in the same way that traditional governance structures can be broken, DAO can be broken. And I think the biggest issue with DAOs is that the token holders do not seem to pay attention to what is going on. They just kind of want to buy and hold their token. And that allows the people who are checked in to distribute rents to, whatever their pet causes are. And it's like not in the best interest of the token holders, but it's not in the best interest of the token holders to pay enough attention to vote no. But there should be like a contract that you can just vote no on every single proposal on the DAO. And everybody should just stake their tokens in that, basically.
I think Gnosis has that sort of system in place.
That's a good service. I recommend doing that if you hold these tokens.
So you're hating Sky, or you're loving Sky for Maker's new remake?
I think I very much appreciate the direction of caring about user experience and users, and realizing that the next phase of this industry is not appealing to the same whales that have been around for 10 years who accumulated a bunch of ETH, but it's like actually going out and actively trying to get new users. And shout out to, I think this is one thing that's really nice about what Base is doing, is that they're actively recruiting new users to the ecosystem, and that's what we need. Like, we need fresh, new air, not recirculating more of the same air. And I think that's my general opinion on like the rebrand is basically it's whatever you think about the execution, like directionally, the motivation is correct. And so I appreciate that.
I agree with you on that. I think user experiences it should be the primary focus, and everything else should be abstracted away. Yeah. Do you have any other things you want to hot take on that I haven't?
Should we talk about whether people should be building infrastructure projects or not?
Sure. On Ethereum?
I think just in general, like there's some sentiment that if we just have people working on infrastructure, then we won't have anybody building apps, and then we won't get any users, which is like, it's kind of a simple argument that's pretty nice.
But how will the VCs make money when it's so much harder to determine which app is going to be the winner versus infrastructure? It's clear the winner's going to be.
Is it clear who the winner's going to be?
I mean, it's a lot easier to bet on an infrastructure provider when you have maybe, say, 1 out of 10 than 1 out of 100 for applications. And the infrastructure winner will have a greater EV than the application winner.
I don't know if that's true. I think ultimately, like the closer you are to the users in the long run, the more value prop you provide, because the infrastructure is going to become undifferentiated.
I agree in a cycle. I think if you looked at the .com bubble, the first winners were the infrastructure providers, and then slowly as the apps, started taking market share away, you saw the dump in that. But do you think we're at that point yet?
I don't know. I mean, like, I guess my point would be basically to defend the infrastructure building. We're not there yet. The tech isn't there. We can't support all the transactions that we want to support. We're not ready for mass adoption. So we should continue to build infrastructure as long as we're not to the point where we can support mass adoption. Like if, for example, Visa wanted to use the chain today to settle all their payments, it would be quite difficult for them to do that because there's just not enough capacity, even on some of the newer, more performant chains. So that would be the point in favor of the infrastructure. Then the problem is that the infrastructure funding that happens isn't necessarily in support of that goal. And so insofar as there's infrastructure funding that's in support of that goal, for example, Succinct, and similar projects that are compiling Rust code to ZK circuits, like this kind of stuff is like very important for scaling because it reduces bandwidth requirements. But other stuff, I'm not so sure, like that's all I'll say on that topic.
So no Visa app chain on Mega ETH or Monad?
If they do, I will congratulate the BD prowess very much.
Okay.
I think we actually have like a partnership with MasterCard on Linea, which is pretty cool.
Yeah. Wait, Linea is an L2. What's the take on that? You're like ragging on all the L2s, but ConsenSys has its own L2.
I mean, we're working actively to decentralize it. All the things that I criticize about L2s, Linea is working actively to fix on their end. And Linea is a ZK L2. And Linea is going after a market that is not the same as, the DeFi market. I think there was this, the Solana people were basically saying, oh, there's network extensions and then there's L2s. My point on whether an L2 is parasitic is whether it's going after exactly the same applications that the L1 is going after. In some ways, it's symbiotic if a L2 can take off like MasterCard transaction load from the L1, because the L1 doesn't want to process that in the critical path. Like it wants to process DeFi trading, more valuable things than, buying my coffee with my MetaMask MasterCard. So in some ways, like having that L2 to take off load is important. It's important for it to be ZK, not optimistic, so that it can compress the state a lot. But I think more L2s should try to not directly compete with ETH and each other, but try to find their own niche and try to be symbiotic to the L1.
So you'd be happy with a meme coin L2 and like a social fi L2 and
Well, I
random
think
L2s.
a meme coin is like the main attraction of ETH L1, so I would hope that there's no. Although I think Base is basically going after the meme coins, right?
Right.
But this is like one of the most valuable things going on in Solana right now is meme coins. So if you are taking that away, then what is there left for the L1?
Maybe actual applications. Well, okay, we went past our time. Hopefully, we gave enough spicy takes to wake you guys up on a Monday morning. So, thanks for coming out.